Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy podcast, a production of neonewstoday.com. I'm your host, Dylan Grabowski. In this episode of the Smart Economy podcast, we were joined by Rebecca Liao, the co-founder and CEO of Saga, a protocol that allows developers to spin up an L1 as easily as they can launch a smart contract. In this episode, we discussed the current sentiment of the blockchain space and why we must build to attract new users, crypto and blockchain's position in the US's political realm, the benefits of launching a native blockchain on a per project basis, why Saga decided to specifically focus on the gaming and entertainment verticals, how Web3 gaming has evolved over the past 3 years, the value that a gas-free chain can bring to its builders and users, and so much more. Just a reminder, nothing said on this podcast is a solicitation to buy or sell any tokens, and that the guest or host may hold tokens discussed in any given episode. You can check out a disclaimer on www.neonewstoday.com. And if you enjoyed listening to this episode, please don't hesitate to rate and review it on your favorite podcasting platform and to share this with friends and family. Every rate, review, like, comment, you name it, really helps us get this podcast in front of more people's eyes and ears, and to get more of your favorite guests in front of those eyes and ears as well. So with all that said, I really enjoyed speaking with Rebecca, and I hope you enjoy the conversation too. Today, we're joined by Rebecca Liao, the co-founder and CEO of Saga, a layer one that allows developers to spin up parallelized and interoperable blockchain networks. How are you doing today, Rebecca?
I'm good, Dylan. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great. Before we hit the record button, I mentioned how fun it was digging into your background and sort of the things you're working on. But to just kind of, before we get to know who are you, why are you here, I do just kind of want to give our listeners a sense of the significance of what Saga is. And so from a high level perspective, can you just share why it's cumbersome for a brand new developer who's new to blockchain to either spin up their own chain or build on an existing layer one like Ethereum or Solana or Near? And what are these chainlets that Saga creates and how does it address this demand of difficulty for building on chain?
Yeah, Dylan, all great questions. So I will answer all of them in turn. And then by the time I'm done, we will have taken a tour throughout all of Saga. But Saga is, as you mentioned, a layer one, and a great deal of technical features that you mentioned after that. So thank you for that. But the shorthand is really we're a layer one to launch layer ones. And I think that will immediately help developers to understand what our value proposition is. So you mentioned Ethereum, Solana, Near, and these other storied layer ones. So these are all single layer ones. And when a developer deploys their application onto these layer ones, they are sharing block space. They're sharing that layer one with all the other applications on there. And what that has led to, as we have seen, is enormous congestion. When there is any sort of appreciable user traffic, it also means that gas fees, which are just a part of pretty much any layer one, that they become quite high and variable. And just the combination of those two things is not great for developers. It's also not great for users. And in many ways, the obsession with scalability in Web3 is because the infrastructure so far has really limited our ability to have great UI UX for onboarding new users and to reach that mass adoption that we're all looking to achieve as soon as possible in this space. So those are the limitations that you work with when you deploy in a single layer one. Now, what is the solution to that? Is to get onto your own block space, to get onto your own chain or roll up, side chain, et cetera. So the reason why it is difficult to get onto your own chain is what does it take to build a chain? So you need your own validator set. You need your own token-based security model to keep those validators incentivized and to keep the network secure. And you need all the services on top of that, and you need to maintain those services as the builder of the chain. So this is an enormous coordination problem. It is also very long and expensive for developers. And so if you're just looking to start deploying some smart contracts onto a chain somewhere, this is probably not your first option. And just to give you some perspective, it's difficult for individual developers or even small teams of developers, but I always like to give the example of DYDX. I think they probably do the highest volume still as a DeFi protocol. And yet it took them 18 months to go off of Ethereum onto Cosmos with all their engineering resources and know-how. It still took them a very, very long time. So that is a no-go for most developers. Now, what Saga is doing is it's taking the best of both worlds. We are a layer one to launch layer ones. So when you're building on Saga, you automatically get onto your own layer one, which we call a chainlet, or your set of chainlets. So we think of layer ones the same way that most people think about cloud servers or instances. Now, for those of the developers who are familiar with deploying in Web 2, and everyone in Web 3 still deploys in Web 2 in some capacity, then you know that you probably start off with one server instance. And then as the performance needs of your application grows, then you deploy onto multiple boxes, multiple servers and instances, and the system just elastically scales with your needs. And we felt that we should give the same experience to Web 3 developers. And so that is what Saga is. We are a layer one to launch layer ones. We call it infinite horizontal scalability. You should never face performance issues with your application. We are costless on the front end, so we do not charge gas to the end user. That solves a lot of the UI UX problems that have prevented people from really entering into the space. We are interoperability first as well. So all of our chainlets speak to one another. That's how they're able to scale. But as a result of solving that interoperability problem, we're also uniquely able to do fast bridging out to other ecosystems. So that's Saga as a layer one.
Fantastic. So much fodder for conversation. As I was preparing this episode, though, my word processor really did not want to coordinate with Chainlit. Yeah. It kept wanting to respell it as chalet. So that was
nice pronunciation.
That was a fun kind of like way to embed in me writing Chainlit. And I think it's a super catchy kind of like description for the L1 to launch L1s. And I also really appreciate how Saga simplifies the message for what the entity aims to build as a protocol, as launching an L1 as simple as launching a smart contract. Yeah. So before we kind of like delve into so many interesting topics and tidbits that you brought up in that kind of like overarching description of what Saga is, I did just kind of want to like take a quick step back and like give the listeners a little bit about who you are and why you're here. And before we hit record again, I was talking about my previous career as an urban planner and how I ended up in the crypto space. And you meandered into being a Web3 founder from a legal career. So maybe you can just kind of give us a perspective of where you came into the kind of like payments realm through being a corporate attorney, and then maybe some of the lessons you learned in that area that kind of gave you, maybe I'm assuming, your aha moment for what cryptocurrencies can be and what these blockchain networks can offer.
Yeah, so Saga is actually my second crypto startup. My first one was more in the DeFi space, and it was called SkewChain, focused on providing short-term liquidity to small, medium-sized businesses. So I was co-founder and COO there for 4 years. The co-founder in that startup his name is Zaki Mannion, which for those of you who are familiar with the Cosmos ecosystem, you know that he's one of the original builders in this space. So we did our first crypto startup together, and this was very early days. Well, not too early. It's not like we were there in around like 2008, 2009. Those are the original OGs. But we both felt the same about the potential of crypto, especially when it came to democratizing financial services. And that's why we got together to do this startup. And then before that, I actually got my beginning in startups generally in AI. So this was back in like 2013. Yeah, it was a long time ago now, over a decade ago. But this was when AI was starting to be a sexier thing to get into for sure, but very early days. And that is a startup called Globality, which focuses on the international procurement of services in an AI-based manner. And I was part of the early team there. Ran business development, founded and ran their Asia operations as well. We got backed by SoftBank within a year and a half, which got us to unicorn status very, very quickly. But by then, it's fun to go through a hyperscaling period, but I already found out about crypto and really fell in love with it and decided to stop out and start my own thing. I would say the inspiration for getting into crypto isn't really through my legal career, which I'll talk about in a second, but it was really through my political career. So the entire time that I have been working a quote unquote day job, I have been very active in politics. And I was part of the Clinton campaign in 2016, as part of the Biden campaign in 2020, and both times advising on foreign policy and tech policy. And when you have the opportunity to interact with your counterparts around the world and hear what it is they hope for from technology, then you learn that as broken as financial services, as slow and sclerotic and costly as financial services can be in the US or Western Europe or places where financial infrastructure is a little more legacy and built out, in some places it just doesn't exist. And for those countries and for those developing economies, something like crypto is not a nice to have. This is not a tool for speculation. This is actually a really vital tool in which they can leapfrog into the financial future. So that's how I got interested in crypto to begin with. It's honestly why I'm still here, even though right now we focus a lot more on gaming and entertainment, which is kind of getting at the same problem, just in a very different, more consumer-oriented way. But that's how I really got into crypto. And before all of that, I was a corporate lawyer for about 5 years, and that's how I began my career. I did the usual. So mergers and acquisitions, securities financings, corporate governance, and the like. But I think after my first full year of practicing, I already knew that I wanted to stop out and find the right startup to be a part of. It took a little bit to find that right opportunity. But once I found it, I did not look back. I still use some of the knowledge that I gained from those early days. I never thought I'd use it again, but apparently it's useful in crypto. Yeah, that's been my career journey so far.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective that blockchain networks are like a nice to have in the US and kind of like advanced economies. But then when you go to other parts of the world, it's a must have. And it kind of is highlighted in the killer use case for cryptocurrencies, which is stablecoins. And funny enough, the network that the majority of transactions for stablecoins like Tether take place on or something like Tron. And so when you go on crypto Twitter and you hear all these kind of like diehard decentralized maxis, you get one flavor of how this technology is used. But then when you look at the rest of the world, like Turkey or Argentina, or maybe even other countries on the entire continent of Africa, you see a very different desire and demand for how these blockchain networks are used and how the assets on top of them are used. So I think it's really interesting that you were kind of purveying this message to, albeit it sounds like the Democratic Party that you kind of worked with in 2016 and 2020. And basically, up until a few years ago, the crypto industry as a whole was bipartisan. And then now one could argue that maybe one administration over another has kind of had an adversarial take towards the companies that are building here or whatnot. So maybe in between 2016 and 2020, and then kind of the outreach you've been doing for the past 4 years, how, from your perspective, has that narrative kind of changed a little bit? How have the conversations that you've had with the folks and the connections that you've made in the Democratic Party maybe changed a little bit? Has your perspective of how the education process for just elected officials in general, has that changed? Or have they kind of like created their own ideas for how they think this technology is used? What's kind of been your perspective? Because I flew out to DC in December with Stand With Crypto to educate Colorado legislators on pro-crypto legislation. And so I got to see a little bit behind the scenes of what the processes are like. But, yourself having worked on multiple campaigns and had these relationships for years, maybe you've been able to see the progression over your time span collaborating with these folks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fascinating to watch because, generally speaking, I would say the Democratic Party is quite tech friendly. So, dating back to really the Obama administration, there's been a very close relationship between the tech industry and Democrats. I think with crypto, it was sort of a couple really interesting developments that have made it shift more conservative and more libertarian, frankly. One is that it does have libertarian roots, very, very deep libertarian roots. And in some ways, that aligned itself quite well with what some Republican lawmakers were trying to accomplish. I think the culture within crypto is in many ways better suited to things that are more, let's call it right wing. And that's why it has been taken up more by the Republican Party. But I also think that it's one of those things where in crypto, the vast majority of the people who work in this space are working on projects. And when you work on community-based ecosystems and projects, you build with your community. So you keep them apprised of developments along the way. There's no such thing, or there shouldn't be such a thing, as you announce that you're going to build something and then go away for about 2 to 4 years and then do a grand reveal later. At every step of the process, you really have to build with your community. And I think that culture applied itself to our policy approach as well. And it's wonderful to have the community feel like they're bought in to our policy approach. Having said that, I do think education goes both ways. So there is education that is absolutely vital for our lawmakers. I mean, first of all, those of us who are natively in crypto and live and breathe this 24/7, it's hard enough for us to keep up with the latest developments and narratives and whatnot. Briefing our policymakers, especially when they have so many things on their plate, that is absolutely critical. So thank you, Dylan, for being a part of that. On the other hand, I do think it's important for our representatives in DC and in other regulatory centers to educate the community as to this is how policy is made, and this is how you execute on a political strategy within DC, London, anywhere else in the world. And I do think that, frankly speaking, our representatives have done wonderful work, but I think there is more of a desire to please the community and to become popular within the community as opposed to really educate them as to this is what it takes. And really the only reason I say that is every single industry that is of consequence has a bipartisan plan. It doesn't matter what your personal feelings are. It doesn't matter what your personal political beliefs are. You have to have a plan for both parties just for practicality's sake. And I would hate for crypto to entirely give up the opportunity of working with, one of two major political parties in the US because of how we personally feel about how that party has conducted itself with respect to certain policy questions. Now, you can disagree with a lot of policy positions that this administration has taken. I certainly disagree with a lot of their stances on crypto, on who they have elevated as some of the more important voices within crypto policy in this administration. But having said that, you have to find a way to work with them because they're not going anywhere. And regardless of the outcome of this upcoming election, they're not going away. You have to find a way to beat your path forward, regardless of who's in power.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel as a founder in the US that at any point, it's just been the past 4 years and there's just been one administration that's been here. So I don't really want to cast stones at one party or the other or one color or the other. But have you felt that there's been concern for your ability to continue residing here and working on a Web3 project?
Absolutely not. I have never gotten attacked for my political beliefs. My bio on Twitter is very clear about which two presidential campaigns I have worked for. But aside from, a few extreme voices here and there, which are just part and parcel of social media, I have never gotten attacked for my political beliefs. I think what people understand is that Saga stands for something very specific in this space, that we have an amazing group of developers, that we have an amazing ecosystem, that we are delivering gaming and entertainment to the space, and we are broadening the user base for crypto such that we accelerate our path to reaching mass adoption. I think that's what people focus on. And I give the crypto community great credit for having focused on that. I think that there have been some people who have asked me over and over again, do you feel uncomfortable in this space? Once again, I think when you ascend to a leadership position, it does not matter what your personal feelings are. It doesn't matter what your personal beliefs are. You are here to do a job. And I work for our community. I work for our ecosystem and our stakeholders. And whatever it takes for Saga to execute on its mission, I am there to execute on it.
Totally. So zooming out of the US, because I don't want to be a US focused myopic podcast, you were recently in ETHCC in Brussels. I love Ethereum conferences. I go to ETH Denver every year just to get a finger on the pulse for what's going on. It's also my local conference. So kind of what was like the vibe at ETHCC? If you go on crypto Twitter, you can find the herds, propagating one narrative or another. And it's easy to find what folks were trying to shit on or not when it came to the conference. But from your perspective, what were folks interested in? What was kind of like the hot topics? How were Europeans feeling about the blockchain space in general? Just really curious to hear your insights.
Honestly, this industry is incredibly dynamic. And this week that we're recording is the week of July 15th. I would say so far it's only Tuesday, but the feeling is quite positive within crypto. The week of ETHCC, I honestly have never seen this level of complaining at a major crypto conference. Even earlier in the year when we had Token 2049 in Dubai and the desert actually flooded, I did not hear this level of complaining. But I think people were sort of sick and tired of the state of the market. I think they did not have the best time in the location for whatever reason. Weather wasn't great. People were just full of complaints. And this week it's very different. So there is one very important takeaway from ETHCC, which is that we need new users in here. We need new users because the reason why this bull market has disappointed expectations so far is that we are by and large recirculating money amongst ourselves. And so we are not attracting that group of whether it's users or investors who really believe in the space, who actually use the products and are helping crypto to move to that next stage of maturation and development. And I think in a way, there's a little bit of an unfair accusation, but the cryptocrat at ETHCC felt a little bit like we had completely over-indexed on infrastructure. That may be true. Now, obviously, what Saga stands for is that you need great infrastructure in order to have great applications. But I also think that the culture of this space really needs to orient itself towards application developers. And that means giving them a proper go-to-market. If you are a platform, i.e. a chain, and you have the capacity to really support your applications, you should do that. Support those developers. I think communities should rally around developers as well. Certainly VC and any sort of capital source should take a renewed interest in applications. If you want that front line with users to be strong, then you have to invest in it. And I am glad actually that at ETHCC, which is historically a very infrastructure focused conference, that people recognize that. And I hope that they carry that spirit with them, even as the market starts to improve.
Yeah. And when talking about applications, I mean, it's kind of perfect that Saga built on the Cosmos SDK because that does enable these quote unquote app chains to be able to be spun up and yarn out. But like you mentioned, where do these new users come from? And from my perspective, for a long time, it was always build the tooling for the Web2 traditional developers and meet them where they're at. So it becomes easier for them to build in the Web3 space. But then, you also have to onboard new consumers. Like, how can I get my mom using blockchain enabled applications and tokens without her having to learn what a seed phrase is or having to download a new wallet or load it with gas? So I think Saga is kind of addressing these two issues from both ends. Going after the users when you talk about things like gaming and entertainment, but also making it easier for the developers when you talk about being able to launch an L1 as easily as you can with a smart contract, as easily as you can a smart contract. But I'm also wondering, from your perspective, do you think we get these new users who are already internet natives? Or, and maybe this is also pulling on your experience that you have at Stanford, do we kind of go after like tomorrow's builders and tomorrow's consumers today while they're still at these kind of these points in their lives when their minds are expanding and they're learning new concepts and they're understanding what their role is going to be in the future and how they're going to interact and interplay in this grand economy that we're all a part of? So I guess to boil all that down is, Where do these new users come from? Is it from the people who are already out there today? They have jobs, they have careers, they're using applications, or maybe they're developers and they're already building? Or do we kind of go after like tomorrow's leaders today?
I would say that, this is the case with any technology adoption cycle, is that you have your early adopters, and then you go through a trough of discontent, where the technology is not quite living up to its promises. But if the industry is serious about making itself, then you address those problems, and then you work hard enough to find that product market fit. And then hopefully some of your applications, for the most part, reach mass adoption, and that draws the rest of the industry with it. So technology adoption cycles have been pretty consistent, no matter the actual medium of technology or the type of technology you're building. So I think crypto, it's the same story. You have your early adopters. I think, the current crop of crypto users are the early adopters. Now, how do we reach mass adoption? I think that is the question on everybody's minds. So put it this way. I think that many applications have figured out how to abstract away things like seed phrases, for instance. So we have tools around account abstraction. We have multiple wallets now that really allow for that Web 2 experience, let's say, where you do single sign-on across multiple platforms. You log in using your email, your socials, et cetera. So there are things on the margin that we have fixed with respect to UI, UX. Now, the issue is when we think about the technology products that have become a part of our everyday lives, whether it's this computer through which you and I are talking, smartphones, even AR, VR that's coming up, et cetera. It's not so much a specific technology feature that we have been waiting for this entire time. It is what value that technology provides to you. And what we have found with any great technology over the last, 30, 40 years is it really solves one of two problems, hopefully both: vanity and convenience. So you want your life to be made easier, and you want to be loved and respected. That's what technology solves. And it is able to do it in a really scalable way. So the problem with crypto is, I'm not saying that crypto has not found product market fit. I think crypto itself, cryptocurrency and coins and tokens, that has found product market fit in a very big way. Stable coins, as you mentioned, they're sort of, own niche, very practical use case, especially for developing market economies around the world. But for anyone within the crypto industry who's looking to transact in a common medium, they're incredibly useful. But I think for a lot of other use cases, including gaming and entertainment, we are still finding that hockey stick for our particular applications. But one of the things that Saga has always stood for is that people are people, users are users at the end of the day. You have to scratch a very human itch that all users have. And so that's what we focus on. Why is it that we've decided to go into gaming and entertainment? Because in many ways, that vanity question that I talked about earlier, the desire to feel loved and respected and part of something bigger than yourself, that's what gaming and entertainment is all about. And there are other platforms that strictly go after payments, for instance, or trying to make people's lives easier. I think the issue there is that we're finding after so many years that what blockchain offers, again, in some jurisdictions is incredibly valuable with respect to payments. In some jurisdictions, it is either a nice to have or it's frankly solving something where there was no problem to begin with. And so I think as people who really are responsible for stewarding crypto's future, because we are the early adopters and we are the builders in this space, this particular cycle, I think we have to be very real with ourselves about what the actual use cases are, what is going to be viable going forward. And there is definitely not a one-to-one correspondence between the narratives that are popular at any given time and what's actually going to hit with consumers. And one of the things that Saga really tries to do is provide leadership in this space and to give other projects an example of what it looks like to have a very clear product vision, to be consistent with it, to stick with it. And the users either reward you or they don't. And in our particular case, thank God we do have a great gamer community, and we are seeing our message really resonate with wider gaming and entertainment, which is awesome. But I do think that crypto oftentimes, because we're so tribal, we try to break other people down into tribes. Are you a normie? Are you a boomer? Are you Gen Z millennial? Are you part of the future? Maybe you're just a fucking human being.
So maybe I've been around crypto since 2017, full time since 2018. I've like seen hype cycles come and go, and maybe I'm a little cynical or callous sometimes. I really thought in 2021 we were going to see gaming just pop off.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we saw on Reddit kind of like the negative response. People thought that blockchains were environmentally hazardous and that proof of work consensus mechanisms consumed way too much electricity and energy. And it even got connected with fossil fuels and the negative externalities that are associated with that. And so I kind of maybe foolhardily developed this thesis that it was going to have to be a AAA gaming studio that really made like a standout game that integrated blockchain and really brought kind of like crypto and blockchain to the gamer sphere. But Saga is actively going after the gaming vertical, like you mentioned, gaming and entertainment. So I kind of want to double down on gaming right now. If you just scroll through Saga's X account, you'll just see game after game after game partnerships, examples like Angelic, Zeraverse, Lusa, and just so many more. So like, are we at this inflection point where maybe it doesn't need to be a AAA gaming studio that brings that one killer game to the forefront? Is it, we're in a new cycle now? Is it going to be another opportunity for these Web3 native games to kind of show what they're made of? From your perspective, like how does gaming and crypto and Web3, how do they really kind of like make it to the mainstream of this particular vertical, which is gaming?
It's a great question. I think 2021 was a really interesting lesson for all of us because it was a very specific kind of gaming that people built and invested into, and that's play to earn. So the idea being you play this game, you earn either tokens or NFTs most likely, and therefore playing a game meant that you earned income. And this was incredibly popular, especially in certain parts of the world where they are looking to generate this kind of personal income. And what we learned from that, however, is gaming is one of those forever forms of entertainment. It doesn't really belong to any individual or any group of people. It is a universal medium for happiness, really. And therefore, people can take it in all sorts of directions. And I think for people who built Play to Earn, who introduced tokens and NFTs into games, they genuinely felt that this would be a really fun experience. Now, the reason why gamers reacted against it is the worst thing you can do with a gamer is overpromise. And so what would happen with a lot of these games, because it takes a long time to build a game, and here I have a great deal of compassion for the game developers because you need at least a few months to get to closed alpha, let's say, which is the very first version of the game or early access. And you need probably another year or two to really polish it and make it a complete game. And I mean, hearing that, you're probably already thinking, well, that's at least one cycle in crypto. And so you may start building the game during a bull market when you can actually get funding for it and pull a team together and people are interested in your project. By the time you finish the game, you're in a bear market. And so it doesn't work with crypto cycles. And so I think with the 2021 crop, what happened was a lot of these game developers felt incredible pressure to just go ahead, release that token or NFTs, start to generate income, traction, momentum, but the game was not anywhere near done. And what happened then was then gamers took a look at this and said, that's not the story that I have in my head. The story that I have is that you tried to take my money and you never intended to build a game. That is the main accusation that the wider gaming industry has against this space. And one of the things that Saga has really tried to do, and I fully admit that we have benefited from being where we are, from having launched at the time that we did, and therefore we were able to observe a lot of this at first and to learn a lot of those lessons before we built out our own go-to-market plan and our own platform. But it's really important for game developers to build with the community. Like I said, involve your community in your decision-making, make them feel a part of the creative process, get them to really identify those common values and that ethos that holds that community together. This is all critical for being a Web3 game. And it's something that Saga has really spearheaded with respect to any game that builds on here, but particularly with respect to any game that builds as part of Saga Origins, which is our own publishing house. So we have a very different approach, let's say, to shipping Web3 games, to identifying the creators that are going to build these games and the kind of game that you ultimately bring to market. It is still the case that Steam, Epic has a little bit more of a liberal policy, but a lot of platforms will not entertain games that have NFT token components. And so if you are going to have in-game assets, if you're going to do on-chain transactions, then you have to do it in a way such that it does not clearly involve a token or NFTs, which is entirely doable. And there's still a great deal of value that the blockchain provides in terms of saving game states, of allowing trading of these in-game assets in a secondary market. Again, not involving NFTs, but still tradable, in allowing players to create UGC and to have their own servers and in-game economies. There's a great deal that you can do on-chain, but it's just a very different flavor of it. I am very glad that at this point, people are moving away from waiting for Activision or Epic, Riot, Rockstar, any of these AAA studios, building that AAA game on chain and, quote unquote, saving this space. That's like saying JP Morgan's going to save DeFi. It's not going to happen. If anything, they're going to be a very, very slow follower, and they're going to be forced into it. Change has always happened from the grassroots. Saga has always stood for the fact that even though we are, very serious and professional about what we do, we are very clearly anti-establishment. In many ways, big studios have failed gamers. They have failed game developers. We are solidly for the indie game developer, for their passionate communities who really are sticking with just a very, captivating creative concept and supporting the people who are building out that concept. That's really what we do at the end of the day. And that's why our tagline is, we are for the crazies who dare to dream their craziest dreams.
I love it. You kind of answered my follow-on question, which was going to be, what's the evolution looked like for Web3 gaming? Because in 2021, it was very much P2E. You can earn tokens. Maybe you can own an NFT of like a skin for your gun, or even like famously Vitalik was World of Warcraft when he lost his epic sword. He wanted to own that physical or that in-game asset as an NFT. But as you were just kind of describing your outlook on Web3 gaming, you also mentioned other ways in which blockchain can be integrated into games, things like saving the state of a game. And what are some other kind of interesting realms that maybe we're starting to see new uses and applications for blockchain as an infrastructure for Web3 games, beyond just getting a token for an in-game currency or holding an in-game item in your wallet?
Yeah, so I would say that saving game state on chain, there's a reason why it is becoming more popular as a use case, and that is you want to be able to trigger certain actions or transactions in the game just based on player action. And you can absolutely do that off a centralized database. But if you want to do it across multiple platforms, you have to have a chain. This is where blockchain excels. It is in cross-platform transactions. And that's why game state has come to be quite important. There are some game developers out there, particularly those who are working in the first-person shooter category, that care about anti-cheating. And saving game state on chain will certainly help with that as well. The more that we welcome on AI agents into the space, either they are playing games on your behalf, or they are acting as NPCs and really serving as those non-human human characters in the game. Being able to log their actions on chain is incredibly important. And so we're finding that game state is a really popular use case on Saga, particularly because we are gasless. And so we are not charging for every single time you're logging those transactions on chain. But the other thing that we're seeing more and more of, and I really credit indie developers for being so creative about this, is the reason why gaming, and for all of our angst in crypto about the state of the market, I would say that gaming in many ways has had a very difficult last 18 months. And that is due to just a glut of content from the pandemic. So way overinvestment in gaming, but also in many ways, the distribution model in gaming is broken. So AAA titles spend anywhere from maybe 50 to top games can be like 200, 300 million for development. And then you double that for marketing. So very few studios can afford that sort of game development to start with. And indie titles, on the other hand, I mean, the simplest ones can be made for anywhere from like $10,000 to $50,000, all the way up to maybe $1 million or $2 million. So development budgets are far smaller. Marketing budgets are practically non-existent because they don't have the bandwidth for that. Now, the nature of platforms is that you're going to try to identify the hits and the winners, and therefore user acquisition has become a game that is just too expensive for most gamers to be able to afford, for most game developers to be able to afford. And what we've always felt is that somehow these games are going to have to find a way to survive, to get their game out there, to find a sustainable distribution model. And that is where I think crypto can really, really shine. So we're seeing that these games of their own accord are acting as cross-chain distribution platforms for one another. And there is a real spirit of sharing IP as well. And so these games are allowing for downloadable content or in-game assets from other games in their games. And so it's sort of like a multiverse UGC type collaboration. And that's where I think you'll get to both that creative and social aspect of using the chain in order to, once again, transact in a cross-platform manner. That's what we're really excited by. And honestly, for those of you who follow gaming or are gamers or fans, you know that Roblox and Fortnite, this is what they do. They allow their gamers to come up with custom content. It is enormously profitable. But because they are owned by their respective companies, there is still that centralized control of this kind of content. What blockchain does is it makes it all decentralized, and that is where you get to mega scale.
So Saga is going to be, I guess, releasing or hosting an upcoming initiative, Indie Summer. Is this going to be sort of an incentive for these Web3 games to kind of create like cross metaverse integration, whereby I can play like one game and then have my character interact in another game? Is that going to be sort of an incentive for the builders and maybe even rewarded? Or maybe if I'm completely off base, you could just share a little bit more about what the aim and vision and desire for Indie Summer is.
So the reason why we call it Indie Summer is it's so arguably pretty much every single game within Web3 is indie in the sense that it is a small independent team and they are not being backed by any major publisher. And that's because all the gaming publishers have refused to take on Web3 games, which is why we decided to become a publisher, because games need publishers. And as a chain, we felt that we were in the position to be able to offer that kind of service to our games. Now, the reason why we call it Indie Summer is to distinguish the fact that there are a lot of Web2 indie titles that are coming onto Saga. And again, these developers, they are the most passionate, creative, original developers in wider gaming. They have incredibly passionate fan bases. And in many ways, they have been the strongest detractors of anything crypto and Web3. But the reason why they're coming onto Saga is that they recognize the creative freedom that they can have here and the ability to get away from these really oppressive distribution models that have left indie developers behind. And gamers more and more are disappointed with the decisions of big studios, and they recognize that Saga is a great platform to really relieve them of a lot of the grievances that they felt over the last, say, 2-3 years about developments in wider gaming. So I think what we really wanted to celebrate was that these indie game developers, again, from Web2, are coming on to Saga. And you asked about incentives. So this is where Saga can be quite unique. We're unique in many ways, but this is something that we've become known for. We have never given a grant to a project, any project building on Saga, with the exception of publishing grants that we give to big, expansive games where we know that they're going to need help for development and for go-to-market costs. But otherwise, we have not given a grant. It is not going to be effective for for finding product market fit if you have to pay your customer. If anyone gets paid to do something, of course, it's a very, very strong incentive. Now, Saga is also luckily architected in such a way that people don't necessarily require grants to build on here. Again, we are gasless. So it's not like we have to pay you upfront for all the gas fees that you're going to spend on here because your application is now on chain. So when it comes to working with developers, what we tell them is, okay, if you are, core strategic interest to Saga, and what you are building is not necessarily an application on here, but let's say just a part of the core protocol that makes the entire community better off, then we could consider a grant. Again, we would consider a publishing grant as well. But otherwise, what Saga gives to you is probably way more valuable than cash, which is users. So our team really gets to work for giving these applications a true go-to-market. And that is honestly where we put the bulk of our resources, is in making sure that you get user traction. Because I can tell you that we can give you a $50,000 grant now, and you go ahead and build the game and you get, 100 monthly active users. This game is not going anywhere. Or we can give you the platform and we can actually do a proper marketing job for you and do community building and sponsored user acquisition, create game awareness, and really help you build that metagame. And by the end of it, you may not have gotten $50,000 from us upfront, but you will have gotten 50,000 MAUs. And that opens doors for you. Every platform out there will want to work with you. They see you as a promising title. Obviously, you have the organic traffic among your gamers, and that is going to pay dividends down the road. So it's a very different way of thinking about how do we help our applications actually get traction. It was a very long answer to a very simple question about what is Indie Summer exactly. It's Web2 indies coming to Saga.
It's really fascinating because I spoke with Gitcoin a few months back, and we spoke about the value that grants can bring to like Web3 projects, and how specifically a grant can sometimes empower like a DeFi builder or a non-Web3 gaming game in a way that is more powerful than maybe VC or even a loan or anything of that nature. But it's fascinating to hear how Saga has found that grants are not kind of maybe the killer use case when empowering a Web3 blockchain game, rather providing the infrastructure and the users. And so that to me is just a super keen insight about how we're starting to see differentiation between blockchain types of projects and how they differ between verticals. And another key thing you keep mentioning is that Saga is gasless. When I took a peek at launching a chainlet, the only kind of upfront investment I saw was that the entity has to stake Saga or P-Saga in order to launch the chainlet. So maybe could you just really briefly describe what like the architecture is behind that and what the upfront costs are to launch my own chainlet and to maintain it? Is this going to be like a monthly recurring cost, or is the chainlet going to be alive as long as my stake is hosting it, basically?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, we do not yet have this feature, but we will have it in the future, where you can go ahead and stake your Saga and then pay for your chainlet through staking rewards. That's absolutely possible. But on a fundamental basis, the way that you keep your chainlet alive is you pay for it in Saga tokens. And the tokens go to our validators because they're providing security for those chainlets. And it is going to feel very much like a recurring payment. So again, in many ways, we're trying to replicate the cloud experience. We think block space is a commodity. And so we accordingly try to price such that it is commodity levels. The way that we do that is by reverse auction among our validators. So it's not Saga setting the price, it's our validators, but they are heavily incentivized to price as close to their true cost as possible. And it's clocking in at about $500 per chainlet per month. And with no other fees in the system, it should be the most affordable way in which to develop.
And then I want to talk about entertainment before we run up to the top of the hour. But just to give the listeners a sense of who these games are that are building in the Saga sphere, are we talking about like the tapping type games that like Hamster Coin, which was really popular like a month ago, but no one talks about now? Or are we talking about kind of like immersive 3D worlds, maybe like RPGs or things of this nature? What's like the scope and scale and I guess like energy that's put into these games? Is it more than just like tap and get, fake internet coins?
Yeah, so anybody can build on Saga. I mean, it is permissionless, and we encourage people to try things out. So if you do want to do a point and click game, if you want to do simple meme game in which people are just getting random NFTs or tokens, that's totally fine. It's completely okay to experiment on Saga, and honestly, in many ways, the system was architected such that you can experiment with applications on here. So you don't have to think so intently about what the business model is for your particular application before you launch it on Saga. So more than welcome to have those kinds of games. And they do provide legit entertainment for people, usually for a shorter period of time, but hey, it's all welcome here. In terms of the kinds of games that we actually back at Saga Origins, however, so these are the games that we will actively publish. It is much more of that immersive open world experience. So the criteria that we set forth for any game that pitches us for Saga Origins is provocative, expansive, uncompromising. So we do want the big titles, the big worlds. It does tend to be intense content. So pretty much every game that we publish is solidly M-rated. And we decided to go after this particular category for several reasons, but one is it is crypto, it is Web3. We should be pushing the envelope. And when we stood up Saga Origins, what we noticed was that most games in this space are very much E for everyone, which is great. That's incredibly inclusive and welcoming. But really what crypto stands for is, again, pushing the envelope, being anti-establishment, putting content out there that big studios are frankly too afraid to touch. So that is the nature of the titles that we put out. The reason why we wanted something expansive, uncompromising, is you don't really get to know the power of the blockchain until you involve a network, until you involve a community or something that is, again, cross-platform. And in order to really support that kind of thesis, you need a game that is as big to match. So yeah, those are the kinds of games that we back at Saga. I would say those are sort of the signature Saga games. But having said that, anyone is welcome to build on here.
Yeah, there's also kind of like a tie back to what you were saying with earlier in the conversation with like blockchain enabled networks, how there's that very libertarian view. And if you are producing M-rated content, you can become very cancelable. And to be uncancelable on an immutable network is something that jives very well with that rating of game. So super interesting to hear that that's what Saga Origins is kind of doubling down on. And at the end of the day, like everyone in crypto right now, the crypto natives are mostly degens. So this is content that's right up their alley. Kind of shifting gears a little bit, because Saga's not just focusing on gaming, but entertainment is also a vertical. And maybe if you look at sentiment on CT, crypto Twitter right now, you see that people might say that like music NFTs failed and the royalties never quite hit in the way that they were trying to when it came to like competing with Spotify. So I guess from your perspective, what are the ways in which our outlook on what NFTs could have been for the music industry? Where did we kind of like have rose-colored glasses on? Where did we expect too much and didn't necessarily wait for the length of the adoption cycle for this technology to empower artists in terms of music NFTs? And then what am I missing when we talk about entertainment being brought on chain? Because certainly it has to be more than music.
No, it's definitely not just music. So entertainment is an incredibly broad category. I mean, it encompasses everything from, film, TV to music. Honestly, like books and NFTs, any sort of art and culture, that is all a part of entertainment. Now, I would say for the early projects that tackled music, it was incredibly brave. Music, I think even those of us who have been in entertainment for a long time, we acknowledge is the toughest industry to crack because there are so many people in the middle who take their cut. And even if you solve for, a handful of those middlemen, there are like 10 others that you have to potentially deal with. And it's an incredibly hard business problem to solve. So it's not just a technology problem. I do think that, once you have a distribution cross-chain distribution platform that starts to solve some of the distribution problems of music, that's when you'll start to see more traction. But I don't think the technology was there back in 2020, 2021 for this. And again, layer on top of that, that music is just an incredibly tough industry. In terms of what does crypto and blockchain mean for entertainment writ large, I keep going back to the concept of UGC, user-generated content, because the trend in entertainment has been to go smaller. So even with film TV, what we're seeing is there are maybe 2 to 3 big studio hits every year in terms of movies. These are the movies who actually do well at the box office. People go to the theater to see them, and they really justify the continued existence of these big budget movie studios and that kind of investment. But what we're seeing is also the rise of streaming and the popularity of TV delivered through that medium, which is already sort of starting to break down just the scale of entertainment that we want to consume as viewers. You break that down even further. And what a lot of people are starting to say is that the movie star is dead. I don't know if I completely agree with that. There are still some actors and actresses who can definitely pull an audience. But having said that, it is the rise of the creator economy. And you no longer have to be discovered by a big studio or by a talent agency. You no longer have to have representation in order to do really well in entertainment. And I think that crypto only accelerates that trend. So the more that we empower people to take content of their own or derived from other intellectual property and to monetize it on chain, then you'll start to see acceleration of crypto adoption in entertainment. I would say that entertainment generally moves a lot more slowly than gaming. Gaming usually leads the way. They're the first ones to adopt any sort of new technology, to experiment with new trends. I think it's just because in gaming, you have a much, much stronger grassroots presence in the industry. Entertainment is still very much controlled by some of the legacy companies who do a fabulous job at their products. But in terms of change in the industry, it is relatively slow. So in that sense, we definitely want to give people a home for it on Saga, and the Saga brand in general just celebrates creativity and the ability to put whatever content you want on here. But having said that, gaming definitely will hit first, and that's why we've put the bulk of our investment there. That is a great question. No. So I would say that with Saga Origins, the gaming studios that we back, I mean, first of all, they're all relatively small. They are small independent shops. With respect to entertainment, I don't know if it's necessarily small studios that we'd be backing. It would be more individuals. In terms of how we would give them a platform, that actually remains to be seen. Because I think a lot of these creators are able to use maybe existing Web2 platforms to have a presence and to gain a viewership. But it's really the logging of the intellectual property on chain or the monetization of that IP on chain where they really look to us. So the distribution platforms that currently exist in Web2, in other words, can work quite well for anyone who's purely interested in the entertainment angle. But what we're seeing, again, with gaming is that it's just progressing a lot more quickly in this space. And so is there truly a Web3 native distribution platform for gaming? Yes, that's not yet true for entertainment. When that becomes true, I think that's when we'll feel much more comfortable either representing or not necessarily publishing, but just backing and distributing pure entertainment assets. But that will be for maybe not even this cycle, maybe next cycle.
Perfect. And to kind of maybe take an abrupt turn and touch on a topic that the salty folks on CT have been complaining about as the complaint du jour. Recently, it's been airdrops. People are just really mad about airdrops. They don't like how much they got, regardless of network activity. Saga is currently on Vault 3, which is its third airdrop distribution. So I guess maybe I just want to hear from a founder's perspective and from a project's perspective. How do you guys view the current state of negative or positive sentiment and outlook towards airdrops? And does that kind of shape the way in which you want to distribute your tokens to your community members?
Yeah, so this is actually it's the fourth airdrop we've done. Vault 3, you're absolutely right. But the first airdrop we did was for Genesis. That was a mainnet airdrop. And then we started to get into the vaults because those are a part of our Power Level over 9,000 campaign. And it's a campaign where over 100 tokens and NFTs are being airdropped to our stakers. So an airdrop is really meant to be a distribution channel. Once again, just getting down to basic business. Why do an airdrop? It is for awareness. It is to get your assets into the hands of holders, so that hopefully they're able to engage with your platform, your application, or whatever the airdrop is coming from. And I think that there is no such thing as an airdrop that is going to make absolutely everybody happy. That's like saying you're going to make everybody on social media happy. It's just never going to happen. So I think from the perspective of a project, you just have to be very clear-eyed about what your objectives are. And the thing is, an airdrop makes it sound like I'm going to drop this and then, you take it or leave it. If you don't like it, obviously feel free to complain about it. The social media is a free place where you can just talk and talk, or you can celebrate this drop and become a really loyal member of the community, et cetera. But the project is sort of out of it at that point. And I think what Saga has done, because this airdrop campaign has really been continuous for us, is we've really tried to use it as a tool to help truly build that community. So we do our Genesis drop, and that determines our initial set of holders and stakers. Now, we had a pretty ridiculous percentage of people stake immediately because they saw the promise of the project, or they knew that additional airdrops were coming. I think we announced power level over 9,000 maybe 3 days after mainnet launch. So people got the idea that there were certain perks to being a part of this community. But that's the way in which you really build that engagement, really build that loyalty among your holders. And what we're doing with all these vaults, and the reason why we decided to become the platform through which our partners did these drops, is we want our community to really get into the habit of supporting the developers who are building on here. And it's a really great credit to our community members that they have started to pay very close attention to the games that are dropping. If they are getting battle passes or NFTs from these games, for instance, and they will actually go into the game to engage and play, which was the objective to begin with. And so I think in many ways, again, it's a two-way dialogue. It's not just, drop, here you go, and good luck. It's okay, here is one set of assets that you can engage with. They come from these protocols. Please get to know the projects and the founders, really support each other because we're all building here at Saga. And then here's another crop where you can do the same thing again and again and again. And again, every single time, I think the community feeling gets stronger and stronger. So airdrops are a very important tool in this space, in other words. But I think that rather than ask, okay, how do I fire off the perfect nuclear bomb? How do I make sure that, the one big airdrop that my protocol does goes off perfectly, that everyone loves it? It's the wrong problem to solve for. It's how do I use airdrops generally to build a community? And if you think of it as a one-shot thing, it's not going to go well. So you have to make it a really continuous process.
Yeah, very cool to hear the thought process around the airdrops and how it just kind of continues to tie into the vision that Saga does bring these MAUs to games that are building on top of the ecosystem, basically. So if anybody listening to this episode got super psyched, whether they're in the entertainment or gaming business, or they're a token holder, or they're just a builder in general, what's the best way that they can contact you and or Saga?
Yeah, so best way to get news from Saga is to follow us on Twitter. So it's Saga XYZ with a double underscore at the end. We are also incredibly active across our Discord and our Telegram channels. All of these handles are available on our website, saga.xyz. And those are actually the best ways to get in contact with us. If you are a builder and you're looking to potentially build on Saga and to get support from us, then there is a form for joining our mainnet on our website. And if you fill that out, then the team will definitely see it and respond to it. I personally respond to those on a daily basis. So really look forward to hearing from everyone.
Rebecca, fantastic. Thank you so much for chatting to us about Saga and the amazing verticals that you guys are working in and your perspective on Web3 gaming. This was a really enlightening conversation. I appreciate it.
No, thank you, Dylan. Really fun conversation, really thoughtful questions. And it's just great to spend time with you.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Thanks so much.
Well, what did you think of that conversation? Hearing Rebecca break down the two reasons why applications and tech uses are attractive to users because of vanity and convenience was pretty eye-opening and simple to internalize as to why we all use these apps every day. It was also really great to hear Rebecca share logic behind Saga's audacious goal to go after mature-rated games, to dare to be different and attract users who will want to consume sticky and new and interesting games that are produced by the Saga Origins gaming studio. And finally, it was really refreshing to hear Rebecca call out the salty nature of crypto Twitter and how we build our way out of this perspective and perception by onboarding the next wave of non-crypto native users. After this conversation, I really did see how Saga aims to empower Web3 builders to dream their craziest dreams. To keep up to date with the Smart Economy podcast, head over to www.smarteconomypodcast.com. And if you like the guests that we've had on the show, please consider showing your support by liking, commenting, and reviewing this episode on your favorite podcasting platform. Any action that you do to interact with this episode on any of those platforms really does help us get more ears and eyes on the podcast. And of course, if you're a NEO token holder, please consider voting for NEO News Today as your council representative. We've proudly been serving the NEO ecosystem since 2017, and will continue to do so by putting portions of our council rewards directly back into ecosystem growth initiatives. With all that said, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Smart Economy podcast, and we look forward to catching you next time.